Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here with a WCW Nitro review. I know that when the WWE Network first launched, that was one of my favorite things to do was go back and watch, the old school WCW pay-per-views, and I was putting up reviews on them. And then once WCW Nitro actually got uploaded, I went back and was watching the first episodes of Nitro and did about 5, 6, maybe even 10 reviews on different shows and sort of lost interest. But I noticed that there was an episode of Monday Nitro from 1996, which was the first episode of the year, which took place on January 1st. The main event of that show was none other than World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair going up against Hulk Hogan, and that must be a mega show that I must see. Going back to the first episodes of WCW Nitro, everybody knows that they debuted, I believe, in September of 1995, and 1996 was one of the biggest years for that company, with the birth of the NWO, and that sort of getting mainstream attention of people coming back to watching wrestling. I said, hey, I gotta watch this show and I gotta see what kicks off Nitro in the best direction. I didn't know it until I flipped this on, but this show came to you from none other than the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia at this time. I was living in Georgia at the time, but I did not get a chance to go. I think everybody knows that I did not go to a wrestling show in Georgia until Goldberg versus Hogan, which would be in 1997, and then of course in 1998 we would get the Finger Poke of Doom, and there'd be a few more shows there in Georgia before I decided that it was not worth my time to go to WCW shows being there anymore. But this was a really, really big show. Honestly, when it comes down to it, wrestling in matches was Arn Anderson, Macho Man Randy Savage, Sting, Lex Luger, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Chris Benoit, all really, really big names of WCW. No real filler on these shows. With Nitro being only a 1-hour show and it being live week in and week out, I want to know from people that went to an episode of Nitro, was it really a 1-hour show? Then with them being in the Omni and them having to sell tickets to these shows, you had to have thought that you would get some dark show matches either before or during the Nitro taping. That's the only way that this really makes sense for them to have that many fans there. Nitro was a big show and it had Hulk Hogan and a whole bunch of names, but you really get paid that much money to go to a wrestling show that's only 1 hour long. This show was a big one. It is in the direction of coming out of Starrcade 1995, aka WCW's WrestleMania. A lot of people debate on what the biggest show was. It always was to me Starrcade, but Super Brawl was always a big show. Bash at the Beach was the big show. Halloween Havoc was always looked at as a big show. They can only have one show that people would look at as their WrestleMania, but Starrcade was it. And, surprisingly enough, Hulk Hogan was not on Starrcade. He had been in World War III, where Macho Man was crowned the World Heavyweight Champion the month before. He had been on, I think World War III actually was in December, so it was in the same month. He had been on Halloween Havoc in October. So for him not to be a part of Starrcade, it was a little bit weird, but that year they did the whole United States versus Japan gimmick, where a lot of guys wrestled twice. Flair wrestled twice, Luger and Sting wrestled twice, Macho Man wrestled, I think, 3 times on that show. So for them not to have Hogan really was kind of weird. But in the main event of Starrcade 95, we had Randy Savage wrestling against Ric Flair. Flair, who had won a triple threat to become the number 1 contender and get a match on Starrcade, was wrestling against Savage. And during that match is when Arn Anderson came down hit Macho Man with the brass knucks, and Flair got the 1-2-3 roll up for a victory. I believe they said at the opening of Nitro that he was a 14-time champion, or he might have been a 12. It was either 12 or 14. Flair would go on to win the belt a couple more times along the way. But in the opening match, we have Arn Anderson against Randy Savage. Savage is coming out trying to get his revenge. In this match, we see Arn Anderson hit a huge DDT, and it looks like that's enough to take out Savage, but Arn wants to get the full shot where he's going to hit Randy with the brass knucks. Randy is able to punch Arn before Arn's able to punch him. He takes the brass knucks up off the ground, and Randy hits Arn with the brass knucks, and then even on the roll-up, tucks the brass knucks back into Arn Anderson's tights, and we see a 1-2-3, and we see Randy Savage getting the victory. From there we go to Lord Steven Regal wrestling against Chris Benoit. Benoit takes a huge risk in this match, taking a dive out onto the floor where he completely misses Steven Regal, and Benoit crashes and burns right there. Regal would roll him back into the ring and roll him up for the 1-2-3. From there we have the opening of Nitro. We have two of the members of the Four Horsemen losing matches back to back. This brings out Brian Pillman. Pillman's out and gets in the face of Chris Benoit. Arn Anderson is there basically to try to be the mediator, but Pillman is saying that they are not holding up their ends of being Four Horsemen, losing these matches to Savage and Steven Regal to open up Nitro. Arn Anderson is basically calling out Brian Pillman for trying to get, the Four Horsemen mixed up with a whole bunch of feuds that they don't need to be in. Arn Anderson is trying to remind Brian Pillman that the Four Horsemen, the goal is basically to keep the championship in the group, to keep the championship on Flair. Pillman is out trying to start fights with the Giant. He's trying to start fights with the Dungeon of Doom. And Arn Anderson doesn't see what the goal is here and what this has to do with the Horsemen getting involved in it. Mean Gene cuts them off, basically saying that they don't have enough time for them to finish up. But basically, Arn guarantees that Flair is going to keep the championship tonight. From there, we go to a match of Lex Luger and Sting wrestling against the Super Assassins. Not much to do here, but we basically see Sting getting the Scorpion Deathlock, and with them rolling that up. I didn't know until actually I tried to find a review to remember all the matches of the show. I didn't know that the Super Assassins were the Warlord and the Barbarian, formerly of WWF at the time. But then again, I can't really remember them doing a lot for them to be there. We come back and we have Ric Flair against Hulk Hogan for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. I thought that with this being the first edition of Nitro in 1996, that we would get to see a title change, but this match actually ends in a disqualification. Arn comes in and hits Hulk with the brass knuckles. Hulk, in Hulk Hogan fashion, no-sells the shot, where we basically see Hulk picking up the brass knuckles, and he beats Flair with him. He beats Arn Anderson with him. I believe even Benoit comes in with Brian Pillman, and Hogan has got all of them down on their knees. The match is thrown out to a disqualification, and we basically see Hulk holding off all members of the Four Horsemen, only for the Giant to come up from behind, and he's about to hit Hulk Hogan with a wooden chair. At the last minute, Macho Man Randy Savage makes the save, and we're left with the Mega Powers in the ring, setting up a match of Hogan and Savage against Flair and the Giant next week in a tag team match. That would be the January 8th edition of Monday Nitro. But this is an awesome episode of Nitro. I think that I might continue on watching Nitros from 1996. Like I said, this is one of the biggest years that the company ever had. We would get to see the birth of the NWO, as well as I believe the return of Roddy Piper down the road. So fun stuff comes up in WCW in 1996, and we'll have to see what comes up later.